the final cut, the filmkin sat on his desk, a small, black obsidian monolith in the glow of the monitor. It had no label. It was the ultimate piece of lost media, a film that had never been projected, never been seen by human eyes. The source of Alastair Finch's madness, now bequeathed to him. He had the equipment to view it. He had a vintage 16 projector he'd restored years ago. A beautiful, clattering machine that threw light and magic onto a wall. He had never been afraid of it before. He knew, with the unshakable certainty that had guided him this far, that he had to project it. The whispers had said it. The projector is the gate. Watching it on a digital screen would not be the same. This was an analog ghost, and it required an analog ritual. He cleared a space on his wall, pushing aside a framed poster. His hands were steady now. The frantic fear was gone, replaced by a grim, fatalistic resolve. This was his purpose. He was the archivist of the abyss, and this was the final entry in the ledger. He loaded the film. It was brittle with age, the sprocket holes slightly torn in places. It felt like handling a sacred, cursed scripture. He threaded it through the projector's gate with the reverence of a priest preparing a sacrifice. His own. He turned off the lights. The room was plunged into darkness, save for the single, bright beam of light from the projector lens, a solid white rectangle on the wall. The air was thick with the smell of hot dust and ozone. He stood by the machine, his finger on the run switch. This was it, the culmination of his obsession. He was about to open the gate all the way. He took one last look around his apartment, at the world he was about to leave behind. He thought of his friends, his family, the simple pleasure of a sunny day. It all seemed like a dream from someone else's life. He pressed the switch. The projector clattered to life, the reels beginning to turn. The beam of light was now filled with dancing dust motes. The first images flickered onto the wall. It was not a cartoon. It was live action, grainy, high contrast black and white. It showed Alastair Finch, looking young and healthy, seated in a chair in the very studio Leo had seen in the reflections. He was smiling, talking to someone off camera. It was a test reel. The film jumped. Now Finch was at his light table, painting cells. He looked tired, but focused. Another jump. He was arguing with a man in a suit, a studio executive, perhaps. Finch was gesturing wildly, his face animated with passion. The executive shook his head, his expression dismissive. The sequence of jumps became more frequent, the edits more jarring. It was as if the film itself was becoming unhinged. Leo saw glimpses of the monstrous drawings, the same ones he'd seen in the reflection. Finch was working late, alone in the studio. His appearance began to deteriorate. Dark circles under his eyes, his hands shaking. Then the film introduced a new element. It would cut away from Finch to shots of the empty studio. At first, These shots were static. Then Leo began to see them. In the deep background, in the shadows behind a rack of costumes, or reflected in the glass of a framed picture, the jittering, frame-skipping entities. They were always there, watching. Finch seemed oblivious. The film reached a sequence where Finch was filming himself with a hand-cranked camera, the lens pointed at his own face. He was trying to document something. His face was a mask of terror. He was pointing at something behind the camera, his mouth moving in a silent scream. The film was silent, but Leo could hear the scream in his mind, the same scream from frame 25. The projector clattered. The film jumped again. This time, the point of view had changed. It was as if the camera was now held by one of the entities. The footage was jittery, unstable, moving with that unnatural stop-motion gait. It was approaching a terrified Finch, who was backed into a corner, holding a cell like a shield. The entity's camera focused on the cell. It was the screaming face. He had drawn his own terror. The image on the wall dissolved into a blizzard of static and light. For a few seconds, there was nothing but chaotic visual noise. Then, it resolved into a single, stable image. It was a close-up of a film projector's gate, the very gate through which Leo was now watching this film. In the image, a single frame of film was held in the light. It was the screaming face. And then, Finch's hand, reached into the shot and carefully, deliberately, spliced the screaming frame into a strip of cartoon film. The jolly jamboree. Leo understood. This was the moment of creation. The moment Finch had hidden his plea for help inside the innocuous cartoon. He wasn't just screaming in terror. He was sending a message in a bottle. The film within a film ended. The point of view pulled back. It was once again the entity's jittery camera. It was focused on Finch, who was now slumped against a wall, exhausted, defeated. He was looking directly into the lens, into the eyes of the thing filming him. And then he spoke. The film was still silent, but Leo could read his lips with perfect, horrifying clarity. "You're next," Finch mouthed. The entity's camera began to zoom in on Finch's face. It zoomed in and in, past the point of clarity, into the grain of the film itself, into the very atoms of the silver nitrate. The image on the wall became a swirling vortex of black and white, and from the projector, a new sound emerged. Not a whisper, a scream, the same scream from frame 25, but now it was not trapped in a single frame. It was a full-throated, continuous, soul-rending shriek of terror that filled the small apartment, a sound that seemed to tear the very fabric of the air. The light from the projector bulb began to flicker, strobing wildly. In the frantic pulses of light, Leo saw them. They were in the room with him, the jittering entities. They were no longer in the reflection, no longer on the wall. They were standing in the shadows of his apartment, their forms shifting and stuttering in the strobe light. They were made of the same substance as the lost frames, grainy, unstable, half-real. They had passed through the gate. The screaming from the projector reached a fever pitch. The strobing light became unbearable. Leo saw one of the entities take a lurching, frame-skipping step towards him. Its arm elongated, a limb composed of a dozen disjointed movements. He didn't scream. He had no breath left. He closed his eyes, waiting for the end. And then everything stopped. The screaming cut off. The projector fell silent, its reels having run out. The strobing light was replaced by the single, steady beam on the wall, now showing only the pure white leader film at the end of the reel. The silence was absolute, broken only by the faint tick, tick, tick of the hot projector bulb. Leo slowly opened his eyes. The entities were gone. The room was empty. He was alone. He stood there for a long time, his body numb, his mind a blank slate. Had it worked? Had the ritual completed? Had the gate closed? He took a stumbling step forward and turned on the lights. The room was normal, his room, his mess. The projector was just a machine. The film can was empty. He had survived. He had faced the nightmare and lived. A hysterical laugh bubbled up in his throat, but it died before it reached his lips, because something was wrong. The world felt thin. The colors seemed less vibrant. The sounds from the street outside were muffled, as if heard through a wall. He felt a subtle, constant vibration under his feet, a hum that was not from his computers. He walked to the window and looked out at the waking city. The sun was rising. People were heading to work. Cars moved down the street, but their movements were not smooth. A man on the sidewalk below took a step, and for a fraction of a second, he seemed to freeze, his body snapping into a slightly different position before continuing. A car driving past stuttered, vanishing and reappearing a few feet ahead. The whole world was like a poorly compressed video file, dropping frames. Leo turned away from the window, a cold horror seeping into his bones. He walked towards his bathroom, needing to splash water on his face. He didn't turn on the light. He leaned over the sink, gripping the cool porcelain. He looked up. In the dark, mirrored surface of the medicine cabinet, he saw his reflection, and standing directly behind him, its jittering, grainy hands resting on his shoulders, was one of the entities. Its blurry face was pressed close to his, and in the distorted reflection, it seemed to be smiling. Leo didn't move. He didn't scream. He just stared, understanding finally dawning. The gate hadn't closed. He hadn't survived it. He had joined it. He was no longer the observer. He was the media. He was lost. He was a ghost in the machine of reality, a frame that had been skipped, a character trapped in the spaces between. In the reflection, he watched as his own image began to subtly change. The edges of his form grew fuzzy, grainy. His movements, when he finally dared to blink, felt to him like a series of discrete snapshots instead of a fluid motion. The whisper returned then, not in his ears, but in the core of his being. It was the guttural voice, now familiar, almost comforting. Welcome, it whispered, to the space between. Leo, or what was left of him, looked away from the mirror. He walked back into his main room, his gait now possessing the slightest, almost imperceptible stutter. He sat down at his desk. The monitor was dark. He reached out a hand that seemed to flicker in the air and pressed the power button. He had a new project, a new piece of lost media to create. He opened a blank video file. He positioned his webcam. He took a deep, shuddering breath that hitched in the middle, like a skipped frame, and he began to scream.